Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a series of books that I have wanted to read for so long, and this video has been a long time in the making because it consists of 7 books. Today we're going to be talking about Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. And I've been waiting for this series for so long because I just never really had the time to invest into reading this series because it's just so long. But I have really liked Sarah J. Maas as an author before when I read Crescent City, and I also read ACOTAR as well. Not the whole series, I've read 3 books and then I decided to start Throne of Glass. There wasn't really a reason for reading the series in this particular order, just that my flatmate also wanted to start the series and I decided to just start it with her to have someone to talk to about the series while I was reading it and to share this experience with, and that was a really good decision. If you have also read the series, you probably also have a lot of thoughts because there's just so much happening in these books. And if you haven't read that series before, I can just say you're going to be in for a wild ride. This video is going to contain spoilers though, so if you don't want to hear that, then I don't think this video is going to be for you because I really want to go in depth about my thoughts and feelings about all of these books. I've got a short summary for each one of those books in case you haven't read it yet or you've just forgotten what happens in the individual books, like I always tend to do. And then I'm also going to give you my opinions on the books and about everything I loved and everything I didn't love about this series. So let's get into it. The first book of the series, Throne of Glass. In the first book, we meet Celaena Sardothien, this world-famous assassin who weirdly doesn't do a lot of assassinating in this book. Let's be real. And she's just been freed from this prison that she was in, where she was enslaved after she has committed a crime. And she is free to compete in the championship of the king of this country to become his champion. And she has to fight all of these other assassins to actually receive that place and then in the end be free. The other option, I think, is to just go back to prison or to die, because it's a pretty deadly tournament. And that is basically the whole plot of the first book. Just this tournament, getting to know the world and the characters. So all of this takes place in this castle, which is very beautiful. And to be honest, we don't know much about the extent of the world yet. The first book is mainly focused on the court, on the romance, and then also on hints of magic and getting introduced to the magic system and the whole lore that comes with the world. And let's be real here, when I started reading this series, I wasn't really that into it. I didn't really get the hype around it because I frankly thought Celaena was one of the most boring heroines that I have read in a fantasy series to date. It all sounded very promising from the beginning, having this badass assassin who trains for this tournament and then competes against all of these grown men and shows them that she is actually the one who can defeat them all. But then she turned out to be completely unlikable. I really didn't understand why everybody seemed to love her and what made her a valid main character that you would root for the entire 7-book series. The reason for that was mainly that she seemed to only care about what she's wearing, about who she gets romantically involved with, and about her looks. She talks a lot about how good she looks in the first book. Everybody else talks a lot about how good she looks. She is only sleeping, reading books, kind of training sometimes, and then also starts to fall for Dorian, the king's son. And while all of these things are not inherently bad, I mean, I also like books and I like reading. But in this case, I was just so confused because this girl, She is an assassin. She seems to be so badass. Everybody is scared of her. She has this big reputation. She has to even hide her identity throughout this book, so nobody knows who she really is. And she just got out of this prison where she was practically enslaved. She has all this really bad trauma, and then she gets sent into the king's court. The actual king who did all of that to her, who sent her into this prison, who is actually, spoiler alert, in the next books turns out to be a very gruesome, cruel leader who just destroyed her home country and basically the whole world that they're living in, and has just enslaved them all. And she just goes with it and is happy about all the pretty dresses she can wear. To be fair, later on we kind of find out that it's all part of the plan and that she's just waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. But it kind of seems for a long time that she doesn't really care. And she kind of also has a bit of guilt over that afterwards, but not enough in my opinion. It just really felt like her actions didn't match her reputation. And to be honest, that feeling kind of stuck with me until way further into the series. There just weren't enough moments for me where she had this clever and ruthless side to her that everybody just talks about. In the beginning of this book even. The plot itself was decent, especially competing in the tournament. I didn't care that much for the romance and especially not for the love triangle between these three, because none of it ever seemed to have some kind of consequence. And as we learn later on, the love interests in the first book don't really matter that much anyway. But still, what I liked about the book and why I actually stuck with the series is that you can get the first hints of the magic system and you can get hints of Elena's ghost and the whole story and lore that there is to still discover when continuing this series. Looking back, it's an okay start through the series, but I think there would have been ways that would have grabbed the attention of the readers much more. I think it's kind of a series where the author grows with the series, and also the readers really grew up with the series, which then kind of explains how there's a shift inside of the series of, in the beginning, we are more in a YA type of storytelling, and then as we go further into the series, there is just much more happening and we are more in a new adult or even adult fantasy world. Which also makes sense if you think about how this series came to be, and that Sarah J. Maas was still very young when she started writing it. And considering all of that, I think it's a really good start to the series, and especially if you grew up reading it, there's probably so much more to it than if you just start reading it randomly like I did. So it's probably a pretty good series if you start reading it when you're in your teenage years. Then we have the second book, Crown of Midnight. In this book, things start to pick up slowly. There are a few cool twists in this book and a huge reveal about Selena's identity. In this book, we learn that Selena is actually Aelin Galathynius, the lost princess of Terrasen. So we actually learn that the king is the one who basically destroyed her home country Terrasen, and that she is the only descendant who everybody thought was probably dead. And she got the second identity as an assassin because somebody found her and took her in. And we learn about that person later in the books. There's this huge love story arc with Kale, which, to be honest, doesn't really matter that much in the books going forward, but I did really enjoy it while it lasted. The much more emotional point in this book, though, was Nehemia's death. Nehemia is a girl or a princess that Selena has befriended while she was taking part in that tournament. She is also from a different country, and she is kind of stuck at the court because the king is threatening her country as well. So that is the most important point in this book as well, that Nehemia dies. Otherwise, there wasn't that much plot that I was invested in, except for that there was this betrayal by Cale that kind of then in the end made Selena not like him anymore, which was what led up to Nehemia's death. Overall, this was a really good book to expand the world building, to lead up to what comes later. You learn a lot about the magic system. There's this huge reveal about the king and his evil plans. You learn about Selena and her not really taking on the job as an assassin after winning the tournament. And you learn about how she is actually not following the king's orders. And then in the end, you learn about this big reveal, the word keys, which are the source of the king's evil powers and basically have to be destroyed. And that ends up being the main quest that these characters follow throughout all of the 7 books. Now, this book dives a bit more into her moral conflict and her struggles with her past, which made her slightly more interesting to me. Now we're getting to the 3rd book, Heir of Fire. Now this part is where I really got hooked into the series. In Heir of Fire, Selena has to leave the king's castle and travels to a new land, where she actually learns more about her magic powers and her powers as a fae, which is something that we didn't know up until the end of book 2, where it was revealed that Selena actually is fae descendant. And that was really the point where I was like, yes, now we finally have something to go for her. There's something that she can still discover, and actually now she gets to use her powers as an assassin and also train her powers as a fae. And she goes to this new place. She goes to Wendlin, and there she gets to train with Rowan. Rowan at first really puts her in her place, and that was my favorite part about this book, that finally somebody told her what a brat she was. That was just really so good to finally see and hear, that somebody finally tells her that she is way too confident, that there are people much stronger than her, and that she really needs to work on her powers. Meanwhile, back in Adelan, where the court is, some other things happen. Dorian gets a new love interest. She gets beheaded in the end of the book. It's kind of not that emotional, even though that happens. I did not care one bit. But he is really devastated in the end of that, obviously. And that kind of becomes his main motive for the next few books. The most interesting part of this book, though, was that we get introduced to new characters. And that was my favorite character in the whole series. We get introduced to Manon Blackbeak. She is one of the witches, and she is an Iron Teeth witch. These witches can't fly anymore because they've been cursed. And now they get these wyvern by the king. Wyvern are kind of like dragons, but different. So there are really cool scenes where we learn about the different type of witches that exist in this world, the way that they are living, how threatening they are, how people are just so scared of them, how much power they have, the whole intrigues between the clans. And there's just so much more to this than all of the other parts of the book that we have had before and about the world building, that I think this really is what made this my favorite part of the series, that we get introduced to these new characters. Now, back to Selena and Rowan. Their relationship starts off really rocky, as I've just said, but over the course of the book, these two come so much closer, which in all of these books, we really have to ignore how old the love interests are, because they are fae and they are very old. And basically all of the female love interests are very young, because Selena is only, I think, 19 or 20 at this point, and that is not good. But actually watching these two characters connect and work through their trauma together really made this book very satisfying. For once, Selena starts to feel like a real person with flaws and depth, and I just love that. There are also some challenges that we face along the way. There are some monsters that we see, and in the end there's this huge fight scene that is also really cool. And before that we get these really nice training sequences for Selena, and I love training sequences in fantasy books. It's one of my favorite parts of almost all fantasy series, so it was really no surprise to me that this was also my favorite part of the Throne of Glass series. So, Rowan is part of the Fae that are bound to Maeve, who is the queen of Wendlin, and we learn that she is not really a nice character. She has abandoned Selena's whole family when they were in need for help to be protected from the king, but Maeve just didn't come. So, Selena doesn't have the best connection to Maeve, but she is also her, I think, aunt or something like that. And that is why Selena is talking to her, and she also really needs her help to fight the king. In the end of the book, though, what is also important to know is that Rowan is bound to Maeve by a blood oath. And that is not something that is easily removed. You can only remove it with the permission of the person who did that. And that is why in the end of the book, Selena has to fight for freeing Rowan from this oath that he swore to Maeve. And that all works out fine, and they can leave Wendlin again. I think what really stood out in this book was how much the world expanded. Because Selena finally left Ardalan, we got to explore this whole new part of the world. And with the introduction of Maeve and also the Volk princes, who are the bad guys essentially, the whole world starts to feel massive. And I really enjoyed the character dynamics between Rowan and Aelin, and of course, my favorite character, Manon. After Heir of Fire, I read the prequel. The prequel is nothing that I really have to say a lot about, because I didn't care that much about it. I think you can read it either after the third or the second book. I don't know which one is recommended more. I read it after the third one. I don't think it really matters that much. These are just some short stories about Selena's past and how it all came to be that she ended up being an assassin, and her training to become an even better assassin, basically. You can see her training with Erwin Hamel, which was the guy who found her after her whole family was killed by the king and trained her to become an assassin. You learn about her going to this whole other country in the desert, and some of the parts of that storyline come up in the later books. And most importantly, you learn about her doomed romance with Sam. Spoiler alert, Sam dies. I didn't care that much about this romance either, because we just didn't get to spend that much time with them. She had already had 3 love interests at this point. It just became a little bit too much. And she was also really young when these books were taking place. It was really interesting to get more backstory and finally learn about the parts of her past that have always been hinted at throughout the series so far, but other than that, it didn't give me that much more. It definitely made Selena's character more likable because of the story about the silent assassins and about her saving the slaves, and I think that was the most important point of why you should read this prequel, because you will start to care more for her character if you think she's likable. My camera just died, but we're just going to continue as if nothing happened. So, the prequel, as I said, interesting for some more background information on Selena, but that was about it. Then we got to book 4, Queen of Shadows. Queen of Shadows was actually probably my least favorite part of the series, just because nothing seemed to happen in this book. If I was supposed to give you an overview of what happened in this book, I can't really tell you that much. Selena just hangs out in Adelan again. They went back there. She kind of went there without Rowan at first, then he followed her. Doesn't really matter. She gets back at Arwen Hamel, who didn't treat her that nice in the past, as we've just learned in the prequel. And then in the end, they kind of try to storm the castle. What I found the most interesting part of this book was that Selena, or Aelin, just managed to hang out in this city the whole time without anyone noticing that probably the most sought after person in this world, or in this realm, Aurelia, is actually right under the king's nose. And yeah, in this book, she just goes on all of the side quests. She just, I don't know. Yeah, there's some things. There's her cousin that she reunites with. Not that emotional, to be honest. Then her cousin is a bit pissed that actually Rowan has sworn her the blood oath now, and they are connected, and he's going to be her second hand, or however you would call that. I don't think that's called that in English, but you know what I mean. He's the most important person in her court, or whatever. I think this book was kind of a bit of a filler book to me, even though I think there was really potential for it to be more epic than it was, because she managed to take down Arwen Hamel, and that was a good part in this book, but it came pretty late. And in the end, we had this really great scene of them going into the castle and then her taking back her power and just them confronting the king and everything. Just everything happened, but only in the last few pages of the book. And there was just so much more potential for this end fight. But I think the main part of the book was anyways to strengthen the character bonds and have some character development as well, because we actually have a new character not really a new character. It's a character that we knew before and now undergoes this great character transformation. We learn about Lysandra. She goes from basically being a side character who is connected to Arwen Hamel to being the most badass shapeshifter ever. Oh my god, that was a really good twist, and it was a great character development. I like that so much. She and Manon are the best characters in the series. And she also managed to prove her loyalty to Aelin really well. And I really like that part of her going from being this really annoying person that you really don't like to being this amazing main character, basically. And that and taking down Arwen and outplaying him were the best parts of the book, except from the ending, where they just shatter the glass castle. And now we finally get to the parts of the series where I could understand why people love this so much. We get to the tandem read, Book 5 and 6, Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. I read these two as a tandem read. I listened to these as an audiobook and did an audiobook tandem read, which was a logistical nightmare, let me tell you that. Because I looked up online what the recommended tandem read would be. And my friend who I read the series with, she just kind of went like a few parts back and forth, and then she just did it, I don't know, according to vibes. But I really followed the tandem read, the recommended one, by looking up the books and what the end sentences of each chapter would be, and just, basically it would have been much easier to just read it, but I wanted to listen to it as an audiobook. But I would still recommend really doing that if you have the chance to, because that made this experience of the two books so much better. In these two books, there are so many points of views now, and you really learn about more of the different characters. You have Aelin's point of view, you have another side character that we learn about who's Lorcan and Elite. They also exist. Then we have Manon and Dorian, we have Kale and Nasrian, and then also Irene, and yeah, that part is in the Tower of Dawn book where the couples change again. It's really confusing. There are so many couples in this series. Actually, who can even keep up with all of that? I don't know. That is also one of my critiques of this book. Kind of like a critique. Not really. I mean, it's nice that you have a realistic depiction of relationships and not everything always works out, and you don't find your soulmate after just meeting one partner. But still, I don't think everyone needs to be coupled up. That is something that Sarah J. Maas has to really learn. And I think she learned that by now, because in Crescent City that isn't really the case anymore, even though there's also quite a lot of couples. But in this series in particular, everybody needs to be coupled up. And there can never be bad blood between two people who break up, because they all still need to work together to fulfill all of the things that they need to do. So yeah, that was really the most confusing part about this and what I didn't like as much. Even though it might be a little bit more realistic than just finding one partner and then staying together forever. I think a mix of these two things, and also maybe some people just staying single. Just let some people have some time. I mean, Dorian's love of his life just got beheaded and now he's with Manon. I really liked their storyline, but just the other girl didn't need to exist. Like, he just could have been single until he met Manon. Yeah, I've got a lot of opinions and I could probably talk about this forever. And I could probably make a whole video only about the couples in this book or in this series. So I'm not going to dwell on it any longer. So I would really recommend reading these as tandem reads, because in Tower of Dawn it gets a bit slower because we have another country that's being introduced and we learn about Irene, who is a healer and becomes very, very important in the end of the books, and her relationship with Kale, and then also Nasrian, who actually then gets involved with one of the princes from that country. Okay, the most important part about this is that Kale actually got injured at the end of the fourth book, and now she is healing him and realizing that he still has some of the Vogue, of the bad people, magic inside him, and she can actually heal that. And that's why they're also being followed. And then we learn a bit more about the spiders. I haven't even mentioned the spiders yet. Yeah, we learn a bit more about them and about different cultures and just different creatures that live all over these countries. But the most important part that comes out of these books is that Maeve is actually also a Vogue queen. She is not actually related to Selena. She is one of the very bad guys. She is part of the Vogue. The Vogue are basically the creatures that just come from a different realm, gave the king his power. Still, the king is defeated, but there's now another evil person. And yeah, these evil spirits are trying to take over this world, and that's what they need to stop by destroying the word keys. And now in Empire of Storms, which is the 5th book, we just basically follow all of these different people around the world. A lot of them are just traveling, to be honest. There's this great fight scene, best fight scene of all of the books, where Lysandra turns into this huge water dragon and defeats a lot of people. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole series. That was epic. And then there's also another part where Manon finds out that she's actually part of a different clan. Which clan? Also really important. Also really heart-wrenching. The scene where she and her 13 other witches basically have to flee from the other clans. But the gist of the whole books is Selena has to try to fight for her kingdom or her power and to prepare for the final battle against Erewhon. And that is what happens in the 7th book. That is the grand finale of the whole series. We finally got to the end. Selena is locked away for a big part of the book, and the side characters take over a lot of the time, and that is also pretty representative of this whole series. Celaena's still not my favorite character. The side characters are so much more interesting. And yeah, there's just a lot going on, a lot of huge cool fight scenes, and I think the best part of this is when Celaena falls through all of the worlds, when she goes to destroy the word keys. Oh yeah, that's a big part that I kind of missed out on. She is supposed to die when she destroys the word keys, and she tries to find a way out. She doesn't really try to find a way out of it, but Rowan does, because he loves her, duh. And now she tries to do it with Dorian together because, yeah, prophecies and stuff. So they try to do it together. Doesn't really work. She kind of falls through all of these worlds, and she finally makes it back home, and all of the gods decided that she just can't defeat everyone by doing the thing that the whole 7 books we have tried to do. The whole 7 books. We have tried to do this one thing, and it doesn't work. And that is so funny to me. I think that's the funniest thing Sarah J. Maas has done in these books. That Celaena just does this useless thing and almost dies for it. And then in the end, Irene is the one who defeats everyone. The one character who just got introduced 1 book ago. That is hilarious to me, and I think that's genius as well. That was what really sold me in the end of the series. That was so funny. Yeah. And then there's also really emotional scenes about all of the other characters. Manon, for example, oh my god, that is so... it's really heartbreaking, because all of her 13 witches kind of sacrificed themselves for her. And yeah, that's just a lot of emotional scenes. None of them have anything to do with Celaena, really. I cared about the side characters so much more, even about Elite and Lorcan, who were probably my least favorite couple. But there was this great fight scene, and yeah. So that was kind of my short, long recap of the series. I know that was probably a lot to take in. But what I really enjoyed, especially about the last parts of the book, was that it all tied it together again. We finally got all of these loose strings that were beginning in the first few books, and they finally tied together, and it started to make sense. And I really think that Sarah J. Maas did a good job with that. I really enjoyed the found family vibes in this book, and I like that we had so many side characters that got introduced and all got their stories, and they felt like their own, and they felt really important, sometimes even more important than the main character story. Overall, Throne of Glass really is a series that grew on me over time. The side characters really were what kept me invested, especially Manon and Lysandra. Aylin's journey also has its moments, but the heavy romance focus wasn't always for me, and I say that as a romance reader. And I think if you're really into all of the fantasy drama, I think this is really a good series, a solid one, even though it has some slow parts along the way. So, overall, I really enjoyed reading this series, especially if you plan on reading any of Sarah J. Maas's other series like ACOTAR or Crescent City. I think it's really good to just have read that, and I'm really glad I did it so I can enjoy the other series even more, because I think there's going to be callbacks between all of these books at one point or another. If you have read Throne of Glass already, then please let me know your comments, and if you haven't read it, why are you watching a video with all of these spoilers in it? Anyways, you're probably not planning on reading it. Thank you so much for listening to me just ramble about all of these books for such a long time. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!